A multitude of significant events have unfolded across the globe recently. Today, we delve into one particular development with far-reaching consequences. Stay tuned as we explore the intricacies of the escalating economic tensions between the United States and China. Comprehensive conclusions will be presented at the end of this analysis. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications so you don't miss our updates. Your support, through likes and shares, is crucial for the channel's growth and helps us continue bringing you in-depth reports like this one. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We value our global audience. Good morning. Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods are poised for a substantial increase, escalating from the current 34% to a staggering 84% starting tomorrow. This dramatic hike signifies a major intensification in the ongoing trade dispute. Beijing's Commerce Ministry has reacted strongly, accusing the Trump administration of employing blackmail tactics. They characterize the imposed tariffs as a typical manifestation of unilateral bullying practices, highlighting the sharp diplomatic rhetoric accompanying the economic measures. The struggle for global supremacy between the United States and China has moved beyond diplomatic posturing and ideological clashes. It is now playing out vividly in real time across international financial markets, critical shipping routes, and the formulation of national economic policies. The repercussions of this high-stakes confrontation are palpable, extending from the financial hub of Wall Street to the agricultural heartlands in rural towns, and impacting industries ranging from cutting-edge technology firms to traditional farming operations. The ripple effects demonstrate the interconnectedness of the global economy and the broad impact of this bilateral conflict. At the heart of this high-stakes economic conflict stand two formidable leaders, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. Both figures are leveraging every instrument at their disposal in an effort to reshape the existing global order to better suit their respective national advantages. President Trump, speaking at a Republican dinner recently, asserted that numerous countries are actively seeking deals with the United States. He suggested these nations are eager, even desperate, to negotiate agreements, framing this as a sign of American strength. This occurred as new tariffs were scheduled to take effect, underscoring the administration's assertive trade stance. He emphasized that countries are reluctant to face tariffs themselves, and that the U.S. strategy involves both making deals and collecting tariff revenue. This dual approach, as presented by Trump, aims to recalibrate global trade relationships in favor of the United States, using tariffs as a primary tool of negotiation and economic pressure. Please ensure you watch this video until the very end, as we will be providing crucial conclusions based on the facts presented. In this increasingly tense global environment, financial markets are experiencing significant turbulence, swinging wildly in response to the escalating trade conflict. Uncertainty and volatility have become the defining characteristics of the current economic landscape, replacing previous periods of relative stability. A senior executive from BlackRock, recognized as the world's largest asset manager overseeing assets exceeding $11 trillion, described the present moment as profoundly unstable. This assessment from such a major financial institution underscores the gravity of the situation. The executive highlighted that the most significant unknown factor is the ultimate extent of the tariff implementation, how high they will go, and crucially, how long these measures will remain in place. This lack of clarity fuels market anxiety and complicates long-term investment strategies for businesses worldwide. The uncertainty surrounding the duration and scope of the tariffs remains a primary concern for global financial stability. Markets may exhibit fleeting signs of optimism, occasionally tilting towards positive territory on certain days, offering brief respites from the prevailing tension. However, the overall market sentiment remains notably fragile, susceptible to sudden shifts based on the latest developments in the trade dispute. This inherent fragility was shaken once again today, following an announcement from China's finance ministry. In a significant retaliatory move, the ministry declared it would raise tariffs on all goods imported from the United States. The increase is substantial, jumping from an existing 34% to a remarkable 84%. This represents a clear and substantial blow to any American enterprise attempting to penetrate one of the world's largest and most lucrative consumer markets. The decision, explicitly made in direct response to President Trump's recent increase in tariffs on Chinese imports, which themselves now stand at a minimum of 104%, has sent yet another powerful shockwave rippling through global financial markets, further exacerbating the already high levels of uncertainty and volatility. The immediate reaction in the financial markets underscored the global impact of these escalating tariffs. U.S. stock index futures experienced a sharp decline, reflecting investor anxiety about the potential consequences for American corporations and the broader economy. Similarly, Germany's DAX index also fell steeply, illustrating the interconnected nature of the global economy and the sensitivity of international markets to these headline-grabbing policy shifts. These market movements are not mere abstract fluctuations. They signal real concern about the economic fallout. The tariff increase announced by China is far more than just a number on a government ledger. It represents a massive strategic shift with potentially severe real-world implications. Every American company engaged in business activities within China, encompassing sectors from consumer goods manufacturing to heavy industrial production, is now confronted with a significantly more challenging and potentially costly economic environment. The tariffs will inevitably increase operational costs, limit sales potential within the vast Chinese market, and are highly likely to result in diminished profits for affected American businesses. Adding another layer to the escalating conflict, Beijing has confirmed its intention to take the Trump administration to the World Trade Organization. This move signals China's commitment to utilizing international legal frameworks to challenge what it perceives as unfair trade practices by the U.S. Furthermore, Chinese officials have subtly hinted that additional retaliatory measures could be forthcoming, suggesting that the current tariff increase might only be one part of a broader response strategy. This possibility keeps international businesses and markets on edge, anticipating further disruptions. As commentators have noted, leaders like Chinese President Xi Jinping, while not subject to democratic elections in the Western sense, are deeply concerned about their legitimacy and historical legacy. Actions perceived as weakening China on the global stage could undermine this standing. President Trump's aggressive tariff strategy has effectively put Xi Jinping in a difficult position, forcing a response to protect national interests and prestige. Consequently, China appears to be girding itself for a protracted struggle, preparing for further confrontations in this high-stakes trade dispute. What's more, China has expanded its list of entities deemed unreliable, adding 6 U.S.-based organizations to this roster. Simultaneously, another 12 American entities have been placed on its export control list. These actions represent a further deliberate escalation of the situation, moving beyond simple tariff measures. While these designations might sound bureaucratic, they carry substantial practical implications for the targeted companies. Being added to these lists means that the affected U.S. entities could face significant restrictions, or potentially even outright bans, on their ability to trade with Chinese firms. This type of non-tariff barrier can be just as disruptive as direct import duties. Typically, such measures target businesses involved in trade related to sensitive areas, such as those concerning Taiwan, Hong Kong, or technologies viewed by Beijing as politically or strategically contentious. In certain instances, individuals associated with these targeted companies could also face personal sanctions imposed by Beijing, extending the reach of these retaliatory actions beyond the corporate level. China understands that it cannot perfectly match the United States' tariff actions on a dollar-for-dollar basis. This asymmetry arises simply because the volume of Chinese goods exported to the U.S. significantly exceeds the volume of American goods flowing in the opposite direction. However, Beijing possesses other forms of economic leverage that it can strategically deploy. Agriculture represents one such potent tool. This sector was heavily impacted during previous rounds of tariff exchanges, demonstrating its vulnerability and political sensitivity. Should the Chinese government decide to once again target U.S. agricultural products, a possibility hinted at by state-controlled media outlets, the impact would be felt acutely within President Trump's core political base, particularly in rural America. Such a move would not only inflict economic pain, but also reinforce the perception that this trade war transcends mere economics, becoming deeply personal and politically charged. This strategic targeting highlights China's capacity to inflict pain in politically sensitive areas of the U.S. economy, even without matching tariffs directly. Simultaneously, China is attempting to transform this crisis into a strategic opportunity. In a recent meeting, President Xi Jinping explicitly stated that China intends to significantly expand its trade relationships with neighboring countries. The focus is particularly on strengthening ties within Southeast Asia. This regional outreach specifically includes nations like Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. These countries themselves have been caught in the crossfire of the U.S. tariffs, experiencing rising costs for imported components and facing reduced access to the lucrative U.S. market. This shared economic pressure makes China's diplomatic and economic overtures potentially more attractive. By fortifying these regional partnerships, China aims to cushion the economic blow resulting from reduced trade with the United States. Furthermore, this strategy could potentially reshape regional and even global supply chains, gradually making them less reliant on Western markets and solidifying China's central role in the Asian economic sphere. Meanwhile, Chinese state media has adopted a noticeably more assertive tone regarding the trade dispute. It has begun mocking what it portrays as other countries begging the United States for tariff exemptions. From Beijing's perspective, President Trump's strategy appears aimed at picking off countries individually, forcing them into bilateral deals rather than adhering to established multilateral trade frameworks like the World Trade Organization. China, in contrast, continues to publicly position itself as a staunch supporter of global rules-based trade. This message is calculated to resonate particularly with developing nations that feel squeezed or unfairly targeted by U.S. protectionist measures. By highlighting its commitment to international norms, China seeks to portray the U.S. as a disruptive force and itself as a reliable global partner, potentially attracting allies and strengthening its international standing amidst the ongoing conflict. This narrative battle runs parallel to the economic actions, representing another front in the complex U.S.-China rivalry. All of these developments are unfolding within an economic environment already saturated with uncertainty. Global corporations that depend on intricate international supply chains are feeling the heat intensely. Consider the example of Boeing's 737 aircraft. Each plane is a complex assembly comprising approximately 2,000 distinct parts, sourced from a network of 700 suppliers spread across the globe. The wings originate from Japan, the fuselage is constructed in Italy, and some doors are manufactured in Canada, while the critical engines are supplied by Britain's Rolls-Royce. The notion of reshoring all this production back to the United States, as President Trump has suggested, is a monumental undertaking. Such a shift would realistically take years to implement and incur costs estimated in the billions of dollars, disrupting established efficiencies and potentially raising final product prices significantly. This complexity illustrates the deep integration of modern global manufacturing and the challenges of unwinding such interconnected systems. In the interim, the imposition of higher tariffs inevitably raises the overall cost of conducting business globally. Companies like Ryanair, which has dozens of Boeing aircraft currently on order, could now be confronted with additional import fees, potentially totaling over £400 million. These substantial extra costs are unlikely to be absorbed solely by the airlines. Instead, they will almost certainly be passed on to consumers in the form of higher ticket prices, ultimately increasing the cost of air travel for the public. The impact extends far beyond the aviation industry. The ripple effects touch nearly every sector, influencing the prices of everything from smartphones and televisions to automobiles and clothing. These are truly global industries, built upon decades of integrated international trade. Attempting to unravel these complex networks overnight is not only difficult, but according to many analysts, practically impossible without causing significant economic disruption and widespread price increases for consumers worldwide. As this uncertainty pervades the global economy, companies are increasingly hitting the pause button on future plans. Investment decisions are being shelved, and new projects are being delayed as businesses adopt a wait-and-see approach. People are becoming more hesitant to switch jobs, and companies are reluctant to expand factories or hire new staff at the same pace as before. This hesitancy, according to observers at BlackRock and other financial institutions, constitutes the most significant underlying threat. Economies thrive on momentum and confidence. Without them, stagnation can set in, leading to more profound, longer-term consequences that extend far beyond the immediate impacts reflected in daily headlines and market fluctuations. The erosion of confidence and the resulting slowdown in investment and hiring pose a serious risk to sustained global economic growth, potentially creating a cycle that is difficult to break. Behind all the tariff announcements, market fluctuations, and political rhetoric lies a deeper, more fundamental question. Is the established global economic system being systematically dismantled, or is it undergoing a fundamental restructuring into something entirely new? Since 1944, the world has largely operated under the Bretton Woods system and framework anchored by the dominance of the US dollar and predicated on principles of open global trade. However, under President Trump's leadership, there has been a discernible shift away from this long-standing framework. In fact, President Trump has even openly suggested weakening the US dollar as a means to boost American exports. This represents a significant departure from decades of established economic policy, signaling a potential move towards a less predictable, more nationally focused global economic order, where the old rules may no longer apply. This potential paradigm shift is viewed differently from various perspectives. In Washington, the Trump administration maintains that its tariff actions are a necessary corrective measure. According to former officials who served during Trump's first term, the prevailing view was that the United States was simply responding to years of perceived unfair trade practices by China. These practices, they argue, have systematically undermined American workers, facilitated the theft of intellectual property, and ultimately enabled the rise of a formidable economic competitor. From this standpoint, the status quo with China had become untenable. For years, successive American administrations had attempted negotiation with Beijing, offered market access, facilitated China's entry into the World Trade Organization, and encouraged foreign direct investment into the country. Critics within this camp argue these efforts failed to curb practices like state subsidies, market manipulation, and restricted access to China's own economy. Therefore, the hardline approach, spearheaded by figures like Nazak Nikaktar, who served as Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Commerce, is seen not just as viable, but as long overdue. Nikaktar contends that President Trump's stance is a direct and necessary response to these long-standing issues, asserting that China should not be surprised by the forceful pushback. In her view, the United States is no longer willing to be complicit in what she describes as its own economic erosion. Consequently, a fundamental reset of the relationship, while undoubtedly painful in the short term, is deemed essential for America's long-term economic health and national security. This perspective frames the tariffs not as an arbitrary act, but as a calculated strategy to compel meaningful change from Beijing. Nikaktar further argues that Trump's approach transcends mere economic policy. It's fundamentally a strategy aimed at protecting national security. By limiting technology transfers and reducing dependency on Chinese manufacturing, the U.S. government, according to this view, aims to ensure its critical industries and military capabilities are no longer vulnerable to a nation increasingly seen as both a rival and a potential threat. The tone from this perspective is unmistakably firm, suggesting a belief that only sustained pressure will yield results. Nikaktar also observes that President Xi Jinping is not the same leader he was back in 2018, during the initial phases of the trade negotiations. In her assessment, Xi has since significantly consolidated his power, reinforced state control over strategic industries, and taken decisive steps to indigenize high-tech supply chains, reducing reliance on foreign technology. From China's vantage point, this trade conflict is interpreted very differently. It's perceived not merely as an economic challenge, but as a fundamental matter of national sovereignty and dignity. This sentiment is echoed by prominent Chinese scholars like Dr. Yu Jie, a senior research fellow on China at Chatham House. Dr. Yu agrees that the conflict has evolved far beyond simple economics, transforming into a symbol of a much broader geopolitical rivalry. For Beijing, she argues, the struggle is no longer just about negotiating better trade terms. It's about resisting what is perceived as a concerted American attempt to contain China's rise and limit its global influence. This perception, whether entirely accurate or not, compels the Chinese leadership to maintain a resolute public stance, especially given the increasingly nationalistic sentiment among its population in recent years. There's a widespread belief within China that the United States is actively trying to halt the country's progress, particularly in technology and global influence. This forces Chinese leaders to project strength publicly, even if back-channel diplomacy continues privately. Dr. Yu explains that China approaches the situation from both domestic and international angles. Domestically, President Xi must maintain strong public support. Internationally, China positions itself as a defender of multilateralism and international trade rules, contrasting its approach with what it portrays as Washington's unpredictability and unilateralism. This narrative appeals to nations feeling pressured by U.S. policies and helps China build alternative partnerships, particularly in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, further diversifying its trade relationships away from the U.S. market. The strategy from the American side, particularly within the Trump administration and among its supporters, remains rooted in the belief that tough measures are the only language China understands. They argue that shock therapy, in the form of tariffs, is the sole means to force Beijing into making genuine structural changes to its economy. This includes addressing issues like state subsidies that give Chinese companies an unfair advantage, strengthening intellectual property protections, and demanding greater market access for American firms. Trump and his trade advisors have consistently claimed that previous approaches, ranging from facilitating China's WTO membership to engaging in bilateral dialogues, have ultimately failed to produce lasting, meaningful results. Their argument posits that only the application of significant economic pressure can alter China's behavior. However, this strategy is not without significant risks and detractors, even within Washington. Critics worry that the administration lacks a clear, well-defined endgame. Congressional hearings have revealed bipartisan unease, with lawmakers from both parties questioning whether the administration has fully considered the potential negative consequences of its actions. The concern is that the tariff strategy might be reactive and improvised rather than part of a comprehensive long-term plan. Some fear the White House has opened Pandora's box without a clear strategy for managing the fallout, potentially leading to unintended and damaging outcomes. Others express concern that the conflict could spiral out of control. Historically, prolonged and intense trade disputes have sometimes served as precursors to wider, more dangerous confrontations. While few currently believe a direct military conflict between the U.S. and China is imminent, the significant breakdown in trust and communication undeniably raises the stakes and increases the potential for miscalculation on both sides. The reality on the ground reflects these complexities. American consumers are already starting to bear the brunt of the tariffs. Prices for a wide array of essential goods, particularly baby products and common household items, many of which are imported from Asia and Europe, are steadily creeping upward. Families operating on tight budgets are feeling the pinch. Construction workers like Jim report that the cost of raw materials, from timber and steel to fixtures and fittings, was rising dramatically even before the latest tariffs took effect, making projects more expensive and harder to complete on schedule. While some, like Jim, remain hopeful that prices will eventually stabilize, they acknowledge the immediate negative impact on their work and their customers. These anecdotal stories are mirrored in broader economic indicators. Stock markets react sharply to every tariff announcement and countermeasure. Pensions, retirement accounts, and 401ks have suffered as market confidence erodes. Investors are nervous, business leaders are cautious, and consumers, especially those nearing retirement, are increasingly worried about what the future holds. Manufacturers who rely on imported components are forced to rethink their entire supply chains, a process that takes significant time and investment. In many cases, viable local alternatives simply aren't available, at least not at the same quality or cost. This disruption inevitably leads to higher production costs, reduced competitiveness, and ultimately, higher prices for buyers. Even companies like Ford, GM, and Tesla, which assemble vehicles in the U.S., still depend heavily on globally sourced parts, making them vulnerable to these trade disruptions. Despite these evident costs and disruptions, President Trump's team insists the pain is both necessary and temporary. They maintain that once the dust settles, the U.S. will emerge in a stronger negotiating position. They point to the fact that, according to their claims, over 70 nations have contacted the White House seeking trade discussions as evidence that the tariffs are working and forcing countries to the negotiating table. However, the counter-argument emphasizes the complexity and potential long-term damage. Negotiations take time, and in the interim, the global economy remains fragile and on edge. Even among America's traditional allies, there's growing frustration. European leaders, for instance, have pushed back against being treated the same way as competitors like China, arguing they should be partners in reforming global trade, not targets of the same aggressive tariffs. In places like Germany, the economic impact is already being felt, with factories slowing production, exporters growing nervous, and confidence in global trade fading fast. There's also a growing concern about alliances, with some foreign governments viewing the tariffs as part of a broader U.S. effort to reshape the global order unilaterally, breaking down old partnerships in favor of forced bilateral deals. This approach, while potentially playing well politically in some domestic circles, risks isolating the United States at a time when international cooperation on issues like climate change, technology governance, and global health is arguably more critical than ever. Ultimately, the situation remains highly fluid and uncertain. What began as a trade dispute over tariffs and market access has morphed into a complex interplay of economics, geopolitics, and national pride. Behind every policy decision, market fluctuation, and press statement are real people, families, workers, and business owners, trying to navigate an increasingly unpredictable world. While some believe in the long-term strategic goals, others worry that the immediate damage could take years to repair. The central question persists: what is the ultimate objective of this trade war? And perhaps more importantly, who truly benefits from its continuation? As the rhetoric hardens and policies take shape, it's clear that the trade war is no longer just a dispute over numbers. It's a test of national resolve and a struggle shaping the future of the global economic landscape. The final outcomes remain to be seen, but the consequences are already being felt worldwide.